Welcome viewers. I am Dr. Taran Kapoor and I teach philosophy, and we are discussing introduction to ethics in this lecture. So in the last lecture we discussed about what is the fundamental terminology to have any dialogue on ethics like morality, virtues, values, the nature of descriptive and normative judgments. In this lecture, we are going to continue our discussion and let us now discuss the sources of moral percepts. Philosophers have approached ethics from vantage point of what holds significance to them. They differ on what should be the norm or standard of evaluations in ethics. There are several ways in which the concept of ethics can be analyzed. One way of looking at the issue is that when we analyze the concept of ethics, we explore the relationship between the right and the good. Shyama Ranganathan has argued that there can be two kinds of explanations of the customary. The procedural explanation has to do with the right in terms of the right course of action. The other explanation regarding good has to do with the outcome of that action. Now, ethics is philosophical inquiry into relative priorities of the right and the good. This is one way of looking at what is ethics. Human actions can be seen as having two parts. First, the motive or the intention of the action, and second, the performance of the action. And this can be seen in terms of the outcome. The question we are confronted with is that whenever someone performs action, we judge their action on the external action itself or on their motive or intention. In Indian thought, it is the motive which is given importance. So when we look at Gandhi, we see he's giving non-violence and love as the intention which take precedence over the outcome of the action. For the metaphysics of Advaita Vedanta, it is believed that all human beings are one because the Brahman lies in all of them. There is then no difference between two people. All are one and same. So the core values of love, kindness, compassion, empathy, honesty, brotherhood, fraternity logically follow from this metaphysics. We then get an insight into how we are under obligation to seek welfare of fellow human beings, like our own welfare. This concept is contained in Lok Sangraha, which is discussed at length in Bhagavad Gita. Any meaningful moral system, therefore, can be built up only against the background of metaphysics. It is a sound metaphysics which provides the foundation for the kind of ethics to be followed. Now look at some examples about which I was talking in the last lecture. Immanuel Kant. Now how he defines a human person. So he defines man as a rational animal. Being a rational agent, human action ought to be good because rational agency ensures it is done for the sake of duty. It is contained in the rationality of the agent that he is going to perform his actions for the sake of duty. J.S. Mill considers utility or the greatest happiness principle as the standard of morality. This principle holds that actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness and wrong as they tend to promote reverse of happiness. Feminist care ethics like Carol Gilligan, their focus is on maintaining autonomy and being connected with oneself and the others through caring for oneself and others. So the concept of mutual care is given precedence over anything else. So we clearly see that there are different reasons given for why we should be moral or ethical in our behavior. I am now going to talk about ethical inquiry through various approaches. What are the key approaches to understand ethics given by or offered in the literature? So the first approach is normative ethics. The second, we are going to talk about meta ethics. And the third is applied ethics. Normative ethics. This is the study in which the systematic construction of a valid ethical system is done. Here, the task is to lay out moral rules for actions, behavior, and ways of life. The purpose of normative ethics is to discover or construct a consistent system of moral norms that stands valid for everyone who follows it. We have already done the difference between normative judgments and descriptive judgments in the last lecture. The objective of ethical theories, then, is to guide us to know and perform what is morally right and to avoid what is wrong. There are certain significant normative ethical theories which are discussed in the Western literature. Deontology, consequentialism, virtue ethics, contractarianism, feminist ethics, even moral particularism. So we are going to discuss some of the key ones to understand the nature of normativity. Now, deontology as a normative ethics theory is focus on duty. Deontology is derived from the Greek root deon and logia, which means study of duty or obligation. It is a duty-based ethics which emphasizes the relationship between duty and morality. So we have to note the focus here. The focus is on duty. In Groundwork of Metaphysics of Morals, Immanuel Kant, who is the most famous deontologist in the Western discourse, grounds over duty and morality in rationality itself. According to him, moral principles and laws guide the individual's choices of what they ought to do. Owing to the will or intentionality, we have a moral duty to do things which are right. There are reasons and intentions behind our actions. Moral duties have intrinsic obligatory value and they must be performed regardless of any consequences. Let us take few examples which are taken as illustrations by Kant himself. Speaking the truth, not breaking promises, among others. An action is moral only if it is done with the motive which is moral. Kantian reasoning is called non-consequential, since it does not look at the consequence of the action, but rather considers the law or duty which governs our action. But the question remains, how does one know which action is the right action? According to him, Immanuel Kant, moral law is universal and a priori. He postulates the first formation of categorical imperative, which I can take as an example. Of course, we need a separate lecture on the conception of morality in Immanuel Kant. But let us look at the first concept, the first formulation, which argues that one must act in such a manner that one can simultaneously will that the maxim of one's action, that is the reasoning which guides his intention, his or her intention, should become the universal law. The first reason for something to be moral or ethical, we just discussed in the last lecture, namely universality, is also contained in this first version of categorical imperative. Mahatma Gandhi also held the non-violence as our duty. So duty for the sake of duty is a concept which is also contained in Bhagavad Gita in the concept of Nishkam Karma. Consequentialism, the second theory we are going to understand under normative ethics, is the theory focusing on the consequences or results of one's actions as being the ultimate basis for any judgment about the rightness or wrongness of that particular action. So the consequences are at the foundation of consequentialism. Any action is moral based on the consequences it brings about. The consequence is the object of moral judgment. The objective is the consequence. All forms of utilitarianisms are consequentialism. Now look at a classical example by Bentham and Mill on utilitarianism. Let us look at the objective. Happiness is the only consequence which matters. That action is said to be right which brings about more happiness in comparison to any other action in the given situation. The good, therefore, entails in the greatest good of the greatest number of people by minimizing pain and maximizing happiness. Again, the question remains, what consequence should be counted as good? How are the consequences to be judged? Because happiness for one might not be happiness for everyone. And is there a difference of qualitative and quantitative happiness? All these nuanced discussions are part of the utilitarian debate. Now we come to the third way in which normative ethics theories can be divided, the virtue ethics. Morality is not just about the consequences or abiding by moral laws and duties as we saw in deontology. Instead, morality is about the virtuous character. The virtue ethics, therefore, focuses on evaluating the character of an ethical agent. Ancient Greek philosophers like Plato, they recognized 4 cardinal virtues: temperance, courage, wisdom, and justice. Aristotle emphasized a study of human nature to explore certain characteristics of virtue that we value in ourselves and others. So the virtuous character is given due importance by virtue ethicists. Aristotle focuses on how to be a good person and to live a meaningful life. People should develop good virtues of character. In the Middle Ages, Christian philosophers added faith, hope, charity, and love to this list. Consequentialists as well as deontologists have acknowledged the relevance of virtues for ethical actions. The virtuous person will be the person who will definitely be able to perform moral actions in a more consistent and rightful manner because he is better equipped to deal with decision making. He or she understands the context, he or she has the requisite characteristic traits to deal with a moral situation. However, both consequentialists and deontologists believe that virtue cannot be the constitutive foundation of ethics, in the sense that there is something else required or another reason required for people pursuing moral actions. And we have already seen that deontologists see the foundation in dutiful action and consequentialists see it in the consequences which come out as by performance of moral action. Now there are other normative theories in the discourse, and this list is not exhaustive because every time there are theories which are acknowledged as normative theories in the discourse and scholarship. Let us discuss very briefly contractarianism. Moral norms for contractarians derive their normative force from the idea that morality is based on contract or mutual agreement. We are motivated to accept morality because we can benefit from the cooperation of others. So, contractarianisms can be seen as a combination of deontology and consequentialism, because for them, the argument is that we can get good consequences if we adopt deontological approaches towards morality. It is clear that the nature of ethics by no means can be characterized in a homogeneous manner. Moral particularists do not believe in absolute objective moral principles. They give more credence to the particular situation and the ethical context into account. Feminist ethics, it takes ethics of care and mutual caring for each other as the foundation. So this list is by no means exhaustive. That's important for us to acknowledge. Now let us come to the second key approach to understand ethics. Remember, the first approach we discussed was normative ethics, under which we did several theories. Now the second is meta-ethics. Meta-ethics is a meta-level study, as clear from the name itself. Meta means about. So the subject matter of meta-ethics comprises questions about normative ethics. It studies questions regarding status of morality, moral judgment, moral knowledge, moral reasons, among others. Metaethics is considered to be logically prior to normative ethics, since its subject matter of inquiry are the very presuppositions of normative ethics. Metaethics does a twofold inquiry: a semantical and conceptual analysis, in order to analyze the meaning of the terms used in moral discourse, terms like good, right, evil, and others. Second, it does a meta inquiry into the nature of ethics itself. And this is to be undertaken in order to analyze the logic of moral reasoning. This deals with questions regarding objectivity, subjectivity, relativity, universalizability of moral judgments, logical relation between beliefs, which can be moral or factual, and whether our moral reasons come through intuition. So there are multiple kinds of questions which are done and investigated under a meta-ethics discourse. Normative ethics in one way discusses principles of ethics, and meta-ethics talks about the nature of those principles. So in this way, it is a second order inquiry. Normative ethics tells us what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad, and meta-ethics tells us about the meaning of these terms, right or wrong. Applied ethics is the third approach to studying ethics. Applied ethics is known as ethics of case type problems. It deals with the application of moral rules, principles, concepts to understand real life cases like euthanasia, abortion, surrogacy, cases in medicine, media, environmental debates, and several other innumerable upcoming moral debates after the advent of technology. The term applied ethics or practical ethics has its origin as it gained prominence during the 1970s. It's a very recent way of an approach towards ethics. However, we have faced ethical dilemmas in our practical sphere for a long time, but academic study is a recent discipline. When philosophers, theorists, and academicians started using ethical theories to address persistent problems in the society, the discipline of philosophy came into contact with professionals in medicine, law, business, engineering, sciences, and this interaction led to the generation of interest in professional ethics and other related issues, leading to the development of fields such as medical, business, and professional ethics. Applied ethics derives its intellectual stimulus from moral philosophy and aims to provide solutions to emerging problems in our society. For instance, there has been a history of civil rights. There has been a history of human rights violation, social rights movements, among others. Many scholars are also suspicious about the fact that whether ethical theory can play any role in case analysis and policy making. Do philosophical theories have any particular use at all? So let us look at the gap between theory and practice, about which so many questions have been raised. Before moving on to applied ethics, it is very important and advisable for us to attain a conceptual clarity through understanding the relation between the two in a contextual setting. It serves the purpose of providing direction, guidance to human action. In the process of fulfilling this purpose, we test moral principles in the context of real life in order to understand the ethical theories and their implications in a better fashion. It is useful to consider theories in relation to their practical issues. Each and every issue can be addressed from the point of view of different theories. General theories should definitely be contextualized in a given situation, or else moral guidelines will be ineffective. Also, we have to realize that it's not always that there is one theory, the application of which can give us a resolution or to a particular moral dilemma. At times, there are multiple theories from where we can draw inspiration. At times, there might be a need to specify what is meant by a broader or vague definition of a term. At the same time, narrowing the scope of general norms can also lead to moral disagreements. Disagreements can be about the scope, context, facts, genuine dilemmas, or even about which norms and circumstances are relevant at all. Disagreement can be about whether a particular dilemma is a moral dilemma or not. So the parties involved may disagree, or several dilemmatic situations can arise, like whether euthanasia is acceptable in a society, because the gift of life is a gift by God, or human beings can take a decision on their own life, whether affirmative action is appropriate, whether capital punishment is morally tenable, and such contentious decisions. The changing circumstances of urbanization, education, industrialization, environmental degradation in the global world order show a continuous need to reassess our moral positions. Now, let us look into some key concepts on nature of ethical reasoning. I'll first like to begin with universalism and relativism. Universalism has already been discussed in the last lecture when we were touching on the concept of universalizability. It is seen as a central feature in ethics. R.M. Hare coined this term in Freedom and Reason. Immanuel Kant's book Groundwork of Metaphysics of Morals and John Rawls' book A Theory of Justice have used this concept. Moral rules should be applied to everyone in the same circumstance. If it is wrong for me to hurt someone, then it would be wrong for anyone to hurt anyone in the similar circumstance. However, relativism is a different and opposite kind of a concept. Relativists take recourse to anthropological evidence and argue there is social, cultural, historical diversity, and they believe that there are diverse social contexts and ethical decisions. Beliefs are determined by these social contexts. They argue that there are no universal standards of good and right. In the name of impartiality, the universalizability principle may actually lead to homogenization. On the similar lines, there is also a debate on subjectivism and objectivism, which can be taken up in a further discussion. Now, there is also a debate on is-ought gap or fact-value distinction. Unlike the descriptive statements, which are assertions about physical world of senses and laws governing it, the normative statements are assertions about value judgments on what is good, right, wrong. Descriptive statements are verifiable by observation of physical facts through listening, touching, looking, smelling, tasting by the help of 5 sense organs, and it is evident by the criterion of truth, which applies to factual statements, and it does not apply to normative statements, since they include value judgments which are prescriptive and in the form of commands. This gap is called Izod gap, and it is well known through naturalistic fallacy present in G. E. Moore. It is not possible to derive an ought from an is. Moore argues that good is neither a natural subject, a natural object, nor is it definable. Philosophers like A.J. Ayer, Stevenson, and Hare contrasted values and facts, which is another interrelated debate along with the is-ought gap. Values are associated with evaluative use of language and facts with descriptive uses of language. This insight is known as Hume's law, where Hume suggested that what ought to be cannot be deduced from what was, what is, and what will. It tells us that normative statements cannot be derived from any collection of facts without a previously accepted normative statement. There is a last point which I will like to make in this lecture on moral skepticism. Very famous philosopher J.L. Mackie has raised doubts on the edifice of objective values. He says that there are no objective values. Skeptics deny beliefs, justifications, reasons, knowledge, facts about morality. Everyone does not agree on ethical issues, therefore there should be no objective values. There are many Western philosophers who are skeptical about the presence of any deliberations on ethics, even in Indian philosophy. There is a misconception that Indian tradition showed no interest in ethics because Indian philosophy is otherworldly and life-negating. There is also an unfounded claim that Indians did not do or used any term for moral philosophy. These claims are shown to be unwarranted by Dr. Radhakrishnan in his significant contribution, Eastern Religions and Western Thought, where he has argued that Western philosophers have been very much prejudiced against Indian philosophy and have been ignorant about the real nature of philosophy itself. I observed that from the philosophies of the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Puranas, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita, and all the classical schools of Indian thoughts to all the contemporary works, it is evident that Indian philosophical thinking is full of ethical virtues and discussions on morality. The general term dharma is used to denote a wide range of duties which ought to be performed by human beings. Dharma is taken to be equivalent to morality. Dr. Ranganathan argues that Indian philosophers question the relationship between outcomes and procedures with the term dharma. Dharma etymologically means and derived from the root dhri, which means to uphold or support. Metaphysically speaking, dharma is that which upholds the universe from within. He suggests that the moral law sustains and governs the moral life of man, and this ties both ideas of good and right procedures in the single idea of dharma. Every school of Indian philosophy has a view on dharma. In fact, most of the schools see philosophical inquiry itself as dharma. So this lecture, we have studied approaches to study ethics, importance of interface between theory and practice, the nature of ethical reasoning and skepticism raised on the ethical theory. We have also been briefly able to discuss the significance of ethics in Indian thought. There are some references which I like the readers to follow to get into the details of these debates. All sphere of human existence, the individual, social, institutional, conceptual, are informed by ethics. It is evident from our discussion today that issues in ethics are multifaceted, evolving, and ever dynamic. We shall discuss more on these issues in the upcoming lectures. Thank you.